Today we're going to go over what we have here is called the Blue Box, developed by a dealer in the US, and fortunately we have representation of it. Quite often at trade shows and customers when I'm doing sales, I get often asked why Kohler versus the other guy. So a big factor in every engine, whether it's air or liquid cooled, is heat rejection. Every engine produces a lot of heat, and that heat has to be dispelled in some way or manner. Getting rid of that heat effectively allows that engine to run longer and more efficiently. Running longer and efficient is what you want in a generator because it's burning fuel. You need reliability because, again, when this thing starts and goes live to protect your home, it could be an hour, it could be days, and we just need that durability built into your machine. So the Blue Box has several components which I'd consider key components of your generator. Some aren't there, and I'll explain some other features that Kohler has versus the other guys. So we're going to start with the top of your motor basically, which is your cylinder heads. And down here you can see this cylinder head is, and these are both off of 20 kilowatt generators, very popular size of machine. So this cylinder head you can see here is from our Kohler product. This is from the other guy. Just looking at it is very obvious there's a lot more heft and beef in a Kohler cylinder head. In fact, if I roll this thing over, I took the time to measure things. The surface area over this entire plane is approximately 64 square inches, and the entire head, as we see it right here, is not quite 7 pounds. Also, for heat rejection, there are 7 layers of ribs to get rid of that heat. And this is all about getting rid of that heat. Here's where your combustion happens. These are your intake and exhaust valves. So this is where a lot of the heat is concentrated in your engine that you want to get rid of. If we look at the other guys, rolling it over also, we can see the total weight is not quite 4 pounds. There are only 6 ribs at various levels for heat rejection. And the entire surface area here on the main plane is 39 inches. So quite a substantial difference in here. So where Kohler shines is there's fewer moving parts when it comes to getting rid of this heat. Kohler relies on using a lot of metal and material to dispense that heat where it's created. The other guys, quite often, what they'll do is have extra parts. And what I mean when I'm saying that is they'll have extra oil coolers attached to the blower housing on the generator. And then along with that extra oil cooler are lines, fittings, clamps. And I'm here to tell you, every one of our service trucks, and there's 3 of them full-time on the road, keeps those coolers, those lines and clamps and fittings on the truck because they fail regularly. And that's a disaster. If you're in a power failure and you have any of those components fail and oil is allowed to leak from your engine, that engine's shutting down if it doesn't destroy itself. So a lot more integrity here with fewer moving parts and getting rid of heat where it's supposed to be gotten rid of. If we roll this cylinder head over, we'll also look at the valve train. The valve train being right here, this is what these rocker arms are, what open and close these springs where your valves are to let fresh air in and exhaust out on the other side. Fundamentally, all engines do it in one form or another the same with subtle differences. If we start off with looking at these rocker arms, you're going to see the heft of this rocker arm is very automotive in nature. These units, which are considerably thinner and lighter duty. The springs, again, very heavy. This is a 2-thumb job to try and push that spring down. That reduces what we call valve float. If an engine runs too fast, the valves actually don't just go up and down, they actually bounce. Highly unlikely it would happen here. If we look at the other guys, these springs are so light and flimsy, with little effort they can be pushed down, and you can get valve float in this case. What operates this are what we call a push rod and a lifter, sometimes called a cam follower. On the other guys, we have this little aluminum rod, very small pivot points. And if you look at this, the size of the hole, again, if we get into a float situation, we've had numerous examples of an engine running a little too fast when it shouldn't, and this can pop out, and literally now you've lost the function of one cylinder head because the valve or the intake side failed to operate. If we look at the Kohler system, all steel push rod, far larger surface pivot area, and if this were to run into an overspeed situation and float, there's a lot larger area for this to bounce around in before it would actually fall out of where it should be, again, versus this tiny little area right here. This being a solid lifter also requires periodic adjustment. Most of the other manufacturers you'll find require an initial setting at about perhaps 25 or 50 hours, and then every 200, 250 hours, pretty common that you need to adjust that. Sounds like a long time, but again, 250 hours is only 4 days of runtime, 5 days. That happens. We get that around here, 2 and 3 day failures. So collectively over the year, you could have your valve lash, that adjustment, go to 0. And when that happens, the engine will start to backfire. It could just shut down, or it may run until it shuts down, but once it shuts down, it will not restart. And if it does attempt to start, like during your normal exercise, or if you manually try and start it, you can suffer from backfires, which can literally destroy the intake system. In most cases, they're plastic on the other guy, so they just shatter and go to pieces under the hood of your generator. So on the Kohler system, they are using hydraulic lifters. Again, very automotive in nature. Most cars, I believe, have had hydraulic lifters since the 60s. Once they're set and they leave the factory, I don't know as you ever touch them again. So again, long term in a big power failure, collectively over the year, if your machine is neglected, and that happens, the reliability on that Kohler system far exceeds what the other guys are doing. Moving forward, next components in the blue box are what we call stepper motors. Most manufacturers use some variant of electric control, and these are basically motors, but they can rotate forward and backward, and they completely control the speed of your generator. Now, when I say that, your generator consistently runs at about 3,600 RPM for an air-cooled product residential unit. And even though your loads come and go, this opens and closes the carburetor to maintain that at 3,600 RPM. If you get any deviation higher or lower, not good, because your house wasn't designed to run on different frequencies and voltages. And this is an integral part of maintaining that stability like utility would. So when we look at the Kohler product, we're dealing with a unique piece, short wire, so we don't have a lot of dangling stuff that we got to tie back and make sure isn't getting caught in heat or moving parts. And the entire item, other than the actual linkage to the carburetor, is all metal. Very durable, very strong, very reliable. Now if we look at the other guys, here's what I'm talking about. The motor itself is pretty much the same motor on all their different models, other than a bracket that holds it in place. But because the distance has changed, they have to add a lot of extra wire that needs to be tied and banded well out of the road from exhaust pipes, manifolds and stuff to ensure it doesn't melt or get damaged. And then the motor itself, lots of plastic componentry. This is a worm gear and pinion setup, all plastic. And again, every one of our service trucks keeps this basic motor on the truck. The actual motor itself rarely fails, but what we find is those two plastic components where they meet, the worm and the pinion, they literally just wear out from going back and forth on an ongoing basis. So again, we're looking for durability for long haul in the worst environments, and not have to worry about replacing parts that might or might not fail. Okay, now back in the blue box.
Big components, again, every engine has them. We've got your crankshaft. So we have the other guys right here. And I'll pull out the one for the Kohler. And we're looking at some key differences here. Again, this is what turns your mechanical motion, reciprocating motion into rotational motion. Your generator is actually fastened to the end of this crankshaft, so this converts all the power into electricity. So when we look at the Kohler component, if I hold them up close, we can see there's quite a difference in heft on the components itself. Larger journals, bigger diameters. This is the total mass on this piece is 16 pounds versus this one being about 12.5 pounds. Kohler also dynamically balances their crankshaft and rotor. So you've got a smoother operation, which less vibration is going to lead to even greater longevity. Now when we examine the components themselves a little closer, you're going to see these holes. This is where a bearing would support this side. This is where a bearing would support this side. And in the center you have your connecting rods from your pistons. As you can see, oil galleries force feeding that precious oil into these components that are spinning at 3,600 RPM. So along with being dynamically balanced, you've got a very positive oil flow to ensure the reliability under adverse conditions. And that oil flowing in here does several things. Other than lubricate, it also gets rid of heat again. If we look at the other guys' parts, like I said, lighter weight. You're going to see an oil gallery on this end, which is your flywheel side. We've got oil galleries like the Kohler does in the middle, but what are we missing? No oil galleries on this side. It's just relying, and hopefully oil gets in there in adequate supply. And this side is also supporting the weight of the rotor and everything in your generator. So heavier, bigger, stronger from Kohler. We'd like to first of all give acknowledgement to Kinsley Power Systems. They're the creator and thought process on putting this whole blue box together, which has been instrumental for us. We get, again, asked a lot of times, what's the difference between Kohler and the other guys? And I'm hoping this exemplifies some of those core features, and this is just touching the surface. Kohler builds into their product a lot of standard features that I'd be glad to go over with. Stop by any of the trade shows. We're going to be at the Cottage Life Show in Toronto, Peterborough Home Show, and the Belleville Sportsman Show here in 2020, the spring of. Check the internet for the dates on those. And the blue box will be with us, so you can see firsthand for yourself the differences between these components.